Native industries, exhibits to be owned and exhibited by natives or Europeans. Welcome to the Taonga Files, the podcast that reconnects whakapapa, Tairaranga, and the journeys of Taonga Māori. Ko Migoto iria ahau.
Ko Amber Aranui tēnei, through research, Taonga speak, revealing where they've travelled, who they've touched, and what they carry.
So let's step beyond the register as we uncover stories that shape who we are.
These stories were never lost. They were just waiting to be found. Kia ora tātou and welcome to the Taonga Files. In this episode, we'll be interviewing Migoto about some very important archives located at the Knowledge Bank in Hastings. In the previous episode, Migoto shared with us the kōrero about the Te Wānanga ledger, a particularly non-typical taonga that, unless you really knew about what its purpose was, it could easily be mistaken for some boring old book. What this also means is taonga aren't limited to pounamu, whakairo and kākahu, but also in items such as documentation, records, photographs, and of course, ledgers. Today I'll be interviewing Migoto to share with us her mahi on the A&P Show archives. Kia ora e hoa. Tell us about the A&P Show archives. What are they? And what do they have to do with taonga?
Kia ora e hoa. Yeah, I'm very excited about this kōrero. For almost 5 years now, I've known about this archive through some research I'd been involved in back home in Kahungunu. And like many archives, what sits just beneath the surface is gold, but it takes a bit of searching before you realise what you actually have in front of you. And for privacy of the Kaupapa I was doing research for, I won't be disclosing names or why I was doing this research. However, I was referred to a place called the Knowledge Bank in Hastings, and I mentioned them in episode 4. If you're from Hawke's Bay or travel through there often, you might be familiar with the old homestead on the corner of State Highway 2 and Omahu Road. The A&P Show archives themselves aren't held at the Knowledge Bank but have been digitised. So I'd encourage you to take a look at their website that I'll put into the show notes. You'll find they've got a lot of gems as well as the A&P archives. So just doing a shout out to the team of volunteers and Linda down at the Knowledge Bank, and thank you for all the work you guys do.
Before we go any further, can you explain what the A&P Show is and what A&P stands for those, I guess, who are unfamiliar? Apparently, the A&P Show began as early as the 1840s, so I found when I was searching it up last night in Aotearoa. But it was brought here by European settlers, with the first show being held in actually the Bay of Islands in 1842. So that actually is pretty early. And these took place across the country. I'll hand that over to you now.
Yes, e hoa. So the A&P Show in Hawke's Bay, I've believed, growing up, was seemingly a Hawke's Bay only thing to know. I don't know about A&P shows across the Motu and the Bay of Islands, but I'm just going to really hone in on the Hawke's Bay experience for the A&P Show. So I remember it growing up as something that had a lot of carnival rides, food stalls, and a lot of businesses advertising as well as sharing presentations, and you could go and look at sheep held in pens. However, this is only part of what the A&P Show used to be. And as far back as the early 1900s, as I can see in the archives, the A&P Show, again Hawke's Bay only, used to be like a contest for livestock, animals, produce, shearing, cooking, preserves as well as crafts. Hence the definition of A&P, the Agricultural and Pastoral Show. But what many people don't know, I know I'm getting to the Taonga part, is that there was a category in the show called Native Industries. I think you might have a clue now where this is going. So this category was specifically for Taonga Māori, and people could make entries for their own private collections into this category. So pretty much a Taonga Māori competition. The subsections inside this category had examples like carvings, decorations, garments, floor mats, piupiu, hats, kits, weaponry, and so forth. As the years went on, some sections became a little bit more refined, such as the piupiu section, breaking down into types of piupiu.
Oh. So before we get lost in this, my researcher's brain is screaming to me, we need to understand the archive.
Yeah.
So the physical archives are not held at the Knowledge Bank, but they hold digital copies of those records.
That's right.
Just specifically for Hawke's Bay.
Yes.
And are these available online to the public?
Absolutely, Ehua.
Okay. I think that's important for people to know because they might not otherwise realise that there is a Taonga Māori type of information or research at the Knowledge Bank. But let's not go down that rabbit hole. We can discuss that, I think, in a future brief. But I think it's important that we make note of it. So back to the Kaupapa. You know, with regards to A&P Show, listening to you talk about, you know, your experience in the Hawke's Bay, I also remember going to these as a child with my parents. And I actually rang up my mother last night and because I had this vague memory of it. And I was probably under 7, I think, when I used to go to them. And at the time, my parents, you know, were dog breeders. And apparently we used to have dog shows associated with the A&P Show, but not part of it. So we would go and do the dog shows, and you can imagine me running around the ring with a dog. And then afterwards, we would go to the A&P Show and visit it. And I remember exactly those things, the sheep in the pens. I remember loving like the wood chopping. I thought, yeah, that was awesome. And what I remember is that these were like multi-day events with lots of people and families. And, you know, I know that we attended the one in the Wairarapa. I'm pretty sure it was in Masterton. And my mum was even talking about when she was young, that she used to go to the ones in Upper Hutt that were at the Trentham Memorial Park. So, yeah. So
I was just going to say that things haven't changed because I've been to many A&P shows down south and they are the same. And like the craft competitions and things like that, those are still going.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. There's the wood chopping things. There's all of that stuff. Still happens.
That's the other thing I Googled was that there's still over 100 A&P shows that still exist today.
Crazy.
And most of them are a lot of them are in the South Island. Sort of going back to the fact that there were Taonga Māori categories in those early ones, I would never have guessed that, like just from my memories as a child. And I suppose it probably wouldn't really have been the done thing when we were young. But it kind of makes me wonder if these categories of native industries were present in those A&P shows across the country. What can one expect when they're looking at one of these catalogues from the A&P Show archives, particularly from that point in time? Tell us what you see and maybe bring us closer to what this category is that you're talking about. Like, what is its purpose?
After being through over a significant amount of these archives, again, Hawke's Bay, there was approximately over 30 years worth of catalogues that contained the native industries category from about 1903. I can reassure you that native industries is specifically Taonga Māori. I guess it might have been too hard to just call it Māori industries. But hey, you know, so let me describe what I see and I'll choose one category that is from 1920. What I can see under the native industry section is that this catalogue was a record for all the competitors' placements. And I mean like first, second, third, for all of the subsections. Under the title, Native Industries, it reads, exhibits to be owned and exhibited by natives or Europeans. Then it says, Judge, Reverend F.A. Bennett, who was from Clive, and stewards in attendance, C.K. White and A.J. Kirkham. I want to come back to the judges and stewards section shortly, but let me just continue with describing the subsections. So the first subsection is carving, which contains 4 types or classes. So just listen for those 2 words. First class in carving, class 274, walking stick, as we know as toko toko. Class 275, Pipe, class 276. Vessel. This could be anything from a hue or gourd to a kumete or a bowl. And class 277. Carving implements. I guess likely to be tools such as toki, adze, and chisels and the like. So the class number is a reference used throughout the catalogue. So class 274 is like the 274th class or type in the whole catalogue for 1920. Under each of the classes and types, individuals whose taonga placed are named. And I can see that first and second places, get this, received prize money. For example, in the walking stick class, it reads, second, Mrs. Geo Ebbett, 2 shillings, 6 dimes, which equals to $25 to $35 today. First, same lady, Mrs. Geo Ebbett, 5 shillings, which would be $30 to $40 today. And so Mrs. Geo Ebbett got first and second, so would have made some money just from entering her toko collection. And I think I'll be here all day if I were to name all the individuals who placed. So Mrs. Geo Ebbett is Mrs. George Ebbett. So I'm just reading out what's on the page. Geo dot is short for George.
Okay, now I'm very interested in the judges and who they might have been in that 30-year period that you were looking at, particularly in the Hawke's Bay. But please, before we do that, can you tell us about some of the other subsections? What other taonga have been referenced here?
Yes, I know. I will get to the judges soon, but the rest of the subsections I'll read out, so please bear with me. This is a list. Decorations for table or wall. Next one. Garments that contain 6 types. Kiwi mat. Feather mat made from native birds. Feather mat made from imported birds. Korowai. Kuri or mahiti pokeha. Then, next one. Floor mats that contain 3 types, so 3 types of floor mats. Māori material and colouring, or made from flax. Māori material and colouring made from pingao and Kiekie. Māori material using Pākehā dye, which I thought was quite funny. They could just say chemicals, but sure. Next one. Piupiu that contains 2 types, piupiu proper and tatangi. Next one, hats, that's all it said. Next one, kits that contain 4 types of kits. Feathers from native birds. Feathers from imported birds. Fancy kits, or no feathers. Ordinary kits.
I'm just going to jump in here and break the flow a little bit because when we were recording this, I was wondering what a kit was. And we didn't clarify that. So I'm just going to pop in and say a kit is a basket. Now you know.
Next one, war weapons that contain 3 types of weapons. Greenstone or blackstone, patu parawa, taiaha. Next one, personal ornaments of Māori manufacture that contains 4 types. Greenstone tiki, greenstone ear ornament, mako, other ornament. And lastly, but rather unusually, it finishes with special classes for New York, which I have absolutely no idea what this means, except perhaps they were selected to be exhibited in New York, and that would make an interesting bit of research.
It sure would. So I think we have a fair idea what these taonga might look like. It's actually difficult to envisage or visualize some of the not so familiar taonga, right? Like I wonder what even a, quote, decoration is.
Yeah.
What did the hats look like?
Yeah.
And also, what is an ordinary kit?
Yeah.
And I wonder how many of these taonga still exist today.
Right.
Within whānau collections and in museums. Mm-hmm. Anyway, please tell me about these judges.
Oh, yes, judges. Okay. So the example catalogued I just shared with you, as I mentioned earlier, is from 1920. But much earlier on in the judges section, I'd seen with my own eyes names like Augustus Hamilton, Henry Hill, and George Ebert. And you might recognize those names from earlier podcast episodes. Now, what's interesting is, in earlier years of the native industry section, is these sorts of people, actually all men, and also not Māori, seem to have been assigned to an important role, clearly had some familiarity or expertise on what, for example, a first place ordinary kit may look like. Also leads one to think that these guys would have a clue or two about what the local private taonga collections were like and who owned what. In later years, people like Paraire Tomoana and Taranaki Te Ua became judges as well. I noticed that some competitors from earlier years had eventually become judges later on. George Ebert is one. His Taonga Māori collection, a significant one, I would have to say, can be found at Hawke's Bay Museum, or MTG Hawke's Bay as it is known today.
Well, I think that answers my previous question about the existence of some of these taonga today. So they, will obviously sit in our museum collections. And I think going back, Henry Hill, he's come up a few times. George Ebert as well. I mean, he's an interesting character, and I think these are people that we need to explore a little bit more in future episodes. But, these guys, they would have known each other, right? And clearly from the prize money, if you placed first or second in numerous subsections, you could make quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like this was a bit like commercialization, kind of in a way. And I wonder if the prize money went towards collectors in particular purchasing more taonga for their collections. I wonder also how many of these taonga changed hands through shows like this. I worry that some of our whānau collections were kind of targeted and exploited. Perhaps it was a way for collectors to know what people have and a way for them to say, oh, I'll give you this much money for that taonga. And, my brain just directly goes straight there. But, talk to us about some of the characters who placed over the years and any patterns or anything that was sort of odd or unusual about what you saw in your research through looking at these catalogues.
Like I mentioned earlier, I noticed some people like, again, Mrs. George Ebert that placed earlier on. Her husband, Mr. George Ebert, had later become a judge. Earlier in this corridor, I read out the definition of this taonga category, which was exhibits to be owned and exhibited by natives or Europeans. And such was the case. Both Māori and Pākehā entered their taonga collections. And I'm talking about over 30 years worth of a taonga Māori competition, which also means individuals and families could enter their collections through 2 or more generations. In 1920, some people, like Mrs. George Ebert, had placed in numerous categories across the whole of the native industry section, not just the 2 I mentioned earlier. She also placed in, 11 other subsections. What? Other high placement candidates include estate of E.B. Williams, who happens to be, small side note, grandson of the William Williams, a well-known missionary and later Bishop of Waiapu, and also the same whānau who wrote the Wiremu Dictionary and played a significant and influential role in establishing Te Aute College and Hukarere College. Anyway, E.B. stands for Mr. Edric Beetham Williams at his estate, and it placed in 14 subsections. But the highest place goes to a Mrs. R. Whakapapa, who placed in 16 subsections. And there was a Paul Whakapapa who'd taken all 3 classes for the floor mat section. And I wonder if our whānau listening might know of Mrs. R. Whakapapa and also Paul, and if or how they were related. Having one individual take out whole subsections was also common. This shows you where, I want to say strength, but perhaps even areas of popularity of their taonga collections. For example, Mr. Mohi Te Ata Hikoia, a well-known leader and politician of Kahungunu, had placed in the first 3 of the 6 korowai classes. Mrs. Whakapapa had placed first for both piupiu classes, 4 hats, and all 4 classes of kits.
Wow. So it's clear whānau had areas of their own collections and that were of real strength, you know, in the case of Mrs. Whakapapa. It seems like there were maybe 2 kinds of entrants, and I guess that is evident in the description. Some were showing their skills, that taonga they had personally made, such as raranga and whakairo, while others were showing their personal collections, be that through whānau or as collectors. But it also demonstrates the business of owning taonga and people playing to their strengths. And I think that's really clear too in what this research shows. This was a time when significant taonga collections remained in private ownership, perhaps the norm at this period of time, and a way for people to show and exhibit their collections. But I want you to talk to us a bit more about the taonga themselves. Have you seen anything sort of seemingly unusual?
Oh, yes, I've been waiting for this part. Absolutely. So ever since I first encountered this archive, I'd been interested in a specific type of piupiu called tatangi. In the 5 or so years, I'd been asking around to all the Kairaranga I know if they'd heard of this sort of piupiu. Perhaps our listeners might be able to shed some light on this taonga. I've not been able to unlock what this taonga looks like. What I found out is that, of course, the tatangi is a plant, also known as mangatangi shrub. To be completely honest, it's hard to imagine what sort of garment could be prepared from a plant that looks like a hedge. But what do I know? I mean, it could have been really popular at the time and look nothing what I imagined. But I wondered too, if no one knew about a piupiu tatangi, that perhaps it might have been a local practice, or perhaps a type of mangatangi that only grew in Hawke's Bay, that you could make into a piupiu. The word tatangi, to me, also suggests that it made a sound, and perhaps when worn, or when the plant was still in the wild. But this is probably the biggest thing to decode from the native industry section is we have no photos or visuals as to what these winning taonga look like. And of course we have a clue, but no 2 heitiki, for example, would be exactly the same. And what makes Mrs. Whakapapa's kits so highly prized? Don't know. You also have to use your imagination for some of the classes and how they're named. I mean, examples such as pipe, vessel, hat, fancy kits, ordinary kits, or worse, other ornaments.
Now, the tatangi example sort of takes you down another pathway, which is what research does, right? Like this could also be a kaupapa connected to some local botanical research, how our Kairaranga might have approached using this source to create a piupiu, to reimagine and revive this mātauranga. This must have brought up so many more questions for you in this research. But if wearing something that looked like a hedge as a skirt, I know we shouldn't be joking about this, but, you know, it's hard to imagine. And so please educate us if there is anybody out there who knows what this looks like. You know, this might have been the fashion, and why not? So I urge our listeners, if they know anything about this type of piupiu, please get in touch. And just to acknowledge there being no images or photographs to describe the taonga or the competition is definitely a challenge. I wonder what other information is out there pertaining to the A&P shows and these competitions in particular, and what people may hold in their own private collections today.
Yeah, I know for sure there is information about the other sections of the A&P show Hawke's Bay competition. I'd just seen a post just in the last week or so from MTG Hawke's Bay about some handmade raffia shoes. I'm just planting that in your mind. That placed first in 1933 and still has the original first place tag. And to think we were doing this episode today and I saw that post was pretty amazing. I'll chuck that link in the show notes as well.
I mean, it kind of makes sense. You know, it's it kind of takes me back to the dog showing.
Yep.
And when I got best child handler, I would get a sash, and I've still got those today. So
Amber.
this can be another podcast, but you know, you would want to keep that. Maybe, you know, there would be important. So you imagine what, you know, little tags still exist in people's collections. You know, if they place first, second, or third place, and I also kind of wonder what photographs exist in archives and personal collections that
Newspapers.
yeah, and that we might not automatically associate with the A&P shows, but you know, might just be out there. Okay, so from this research, what are the top takeaways for you from this archive?
Right. Top takeaways from me. First one, I'd encourage our listeners to access the Knowledge Bank's website. To see the catalogues, you don't need to physically go down to the Knowledge Bank, especially local kahungunu whānau who have a particular interest in taonga or hold large collections. If you did want to pop down to the Knowledge Bank, they're wonderful and helpful, but perhaps contact them before visiting so they can be prepared. Remember, they don't hold the hard copies, just the digitised versions, actually on PCs. Be inquisitive, curious and interested. Always look beyond what's in front of you. I learned that lesson in this archive. At the beginning, I was only aware of one page that contained taonga Māori, but with a little more mahi and patience, I discovered the 30 years worth of catalogues. Discovering this archive showed me that within that 30-year time span, a rough estimate of how many people, families, estates held significant taonga Māori collections in the Hawke's Bay region alone. And that was only the taonga that had placed in the competition. And lastly, showing or exhibiting taonga Māori was currency. And you could win some money.
Interesting that. Yeah, I remember the time where we both went to the Knowledge Bank a few years ago and we met the volunteers.
Yes.
I totally agree. You know, you have to go through the boring stuff to find what you're looking for. And sometimes it's more than you expect. But those ladies at the Knowledge Bank, they were lovely.
Oh, so lovely.
We had a great afternoon,
we
morning
did.
tea or afternoon tea with them. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. You know, I have to say this has been a really interesting kōrero e hoa. And, you know, thank you so much for sharing this with us.
Hey, I've enjoyed this e hoa, and ngā mihi nui ki a koe. I'd be interested in hearing any feedback from our listeners, or if you have any whakaaro, please let us know.